How many of you know what just happened today? Anyone? We got a new president. So it was just announced today that Provost Mark Schlissel from Brown University has become the 14th president of the University of Michigan. And I'm delighted and looking forward to his arrival, and I want to take a moment to talk about President Mary Sue Coleman. It seems fitting since this announcement was made today. Mary Sue Coleman has been one of the most influential presidents around the United States and certainly a force here at the University of Michigan for innovation and entrepreneurship. And because this is a class about entrepreneurship, I want to take a moment for all of us to thank her for her contributions over the past 12 years in helping this become one of the leading universities in entrepreneurship. The rest of us also know that earlier this week we celebrated one of the United States' great citizens, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And it takes no further explanation there. So if I want to connect some dots for us, today we have with us, the first time on this stage, a college president. We have a college president of a historically black college, Paul Quinn College, in Dallas, Texas. And what I can say, and President Michael Sorrell will go into more detail, is that Paul Quinn College, as recently as about 7 or 8 years ago, almost shuttered its doors. There was accreditation fights. It didn't look like it was going to be able to sustain itself. And President Sorrell has not only helped it sustain itself, but brought it back to force so that in 2011, Paul Quinn College was the historically black college and university of the year. In 2012, he was the historically black college and university male president of the year. He has become a leading advocate for entrepreneurial education, among other things. And I'm just delighted that he's here with us at the University of Michigan. Would you all please join me in welcoming President Sorrell. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Good afternoon. Okay. We can do a little bit better than that, or else I'm going to feel like you guys are still frozen. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. We have a custom at Paul Quinn College that when we come out, we greet people and they greet us back, and it helps to create a much warmer room, and we think that's important. So I am thrilled to be here with you today. I'm a huge fan of the University of Michigan. I grew up in Chicago, so lots of my friends wound up coming to school here. I went to school a little further south at a small college called Oberlin College in Ohio. I thought I heard one person clap, so I'll match that. Thank you very much. Then I went on to get my master's in public policy and my law degree at Duke University, which was a hell of a lot warmer than it is here. But I'm excited to be here with you, but before you take anything that I say as the gospel, you need to know something. I'm here with you today because I essentially failed at 3 things, right? The first thing was I failed at becoming a great attorney. All right, I went to law school because I was inspired by Thurgood Marshall. Does everybody here know Thurgood Marshall? All right, so I grew up fascinated by what he did in shaping history and how he pursued a line of cases that wound up ultimately in Brown versus the Board of Education, how he won more cases in front of the Supreme Court than anyone, how he was the first African-American Supreme Court justice. So I was incredibly inspired by that, and I said, you know what? I want to become the next Thurgood Marshall. So I went to law school, except when I came out, I wound up a corporate securities lawyer. And I don't know how many of you know what being a corporate securities lawyer is like, but it's about as far from being Thurgood Marshall as you can become. All right, so I spent my time drafting documents, mergers and acquisition agreements, things that made lots of people lots of money, but it certainly didn't impact any social change. So I looked down the road and decided that this was just not how I saw my life turning out. I was good at it, but I never was going to have the passion to be great at it. So my first failure was I wasn't a great attorney. My second failure was when I got done practicing law. So I joined a big law firm in Dallas, did that for 3 years. Then I went to work in the White House in the Clinton administration, and that was fascinating, although had the misfortune of being there during the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So you can imagine what it's like to spend a year and a half of your life trying to talk about everything but sex, right? Did not turn out very well, by the way. So after I got done talking about sex, I went back to practice law in Dallas and joined a boutique firm, and we represented a family, a very influential family in Texas who had many, many different holdings, and I learned the value of how business really gets done, right? How deals are done, who does them, how you speak the language, the way you carry yourself. That was the best apprenticeship that I could have ever had. But ironically, what the partners at that small boutique law firm told me was they said, listen, some lawyers are too important to practice law. We're counselors. So that revolutionized the way I looked at the practice of law. So we did that for a while. Then I joined a public affairs firm where I developed an expertise in solving very complicated and tricky crises. Right? I was the guy you called when you needed something to go away and it needed to get off of the front page of the paper. Now, nowadays, people, I tell them that and they say, oh, you were like Olivia Pope. Yeah, do I look like Olivia Pope? Right? Like Olivia Pope, it's a whole different ballgame. She did it at a level which I could not, frankly, have imagined. I dealt with things a little different and far more corporate related. So I enjoyed that. But I developed an expertise while doing that where I worked with professional athletes and people who aspired to be professional athletes. So I started getting a reputation as a guy that families could call and would help them in handling situations with the basketball culture. My deal with them was very simple. I will help you, but understand, one, if you have a high school student who's being recruited, I'm going to try and convince you to send your child to the best academic school that they can get into. I think you use your athletic gifts to create academic opportunities and professional opportunities for yourself that last long after the bouncing stops with the basketball. I said, the second thing you need to understand is I refuse to accept any money from you. Because in that culture, everyone is looking for something, right? They want a handout. They want an edge. They want a gift. I didn't want any of that. I was in it because I wanted to help people have better lives. So that was a wonderful opportunity. And as you can imagine, a guy in that business that didn't want money got lots of clients, right? So one thing led to another, and I started my own company eventually, and half of the clients were Fortune 100 companies, and the other half were prospective NBA draft picks. And some of the people that I worked with were people like Chris Bosh. You guys know Chris Bosh? Yeah. You know Darren Williams? Darren Williams is one of my clients. Those of you who are from the Big Ten country, you might remember a guy by the name of Bracy Wright, who was all Big Ten at Indiana University. He was one of our clients. And my job was to take them, repackage them, create a brand for them, and then help influence their draft pick spot by waging essentially a political campaign. So that was a lot of fun. I loved it. I've been to the green room. I was at the draft. Went to planned draft parties. We can have that conversation later. That's a whole different life, and it's pretty fun. But eventually you get to a place where, for me, I always liked the management side. So a group of guys I went to Duke with, and some of you may remember them if you're true Michigan fans, Christian Laettner and Brian Davis. Okay, I understand. We won, you lost. I got it, all right. Don't be too bent out of shape about that, Michigan fan. But they tried to buy the Memphis Grizzlies, and they hired me to help that bid process. And if we had won, if we had been successful, I would have wound up being president of the Grizzlies. So I was working very, very hard on that. But to give you a sense of how our efforts went, one of our investors was Michael Vick. Yeah, so remember I told you about Monica Lewinsky in the White House? Well, imagine trying to buy a basketball team with Michael Vick as one of your investors during the dog crisis. Right? So long story short, I failed at buying the basketball team. Right? So that's my second failure. That wound up not going very well. We were trying to get the Memphis Grizzlies, and ultimately it just didn't work out. But while I was in the process of doing that, I got a phone call from the chair of the board at Paul Quinn College, and he said, hey, how would you like to be president of Paul Quinn College? I said, I didn't interview for the job. He said, yeah, that's not a problem, all right? Which should have been my first clue, right? So I said, well, look, we're in the process of buying this basketball team, and if we're successful, I'm moving to Memphis to be president of the franchise, and I've already got my house picked out, life's about to be great, and I don't know what you're gonna pay me, but it's not gonna be more than they're gonna pay me, right? And he said, yeah, but this is a calling, this is a mission. I said, I respect that. I will send you lots of money from my new mission, right? And so he said to me, well, listen, think about it. Maybe you can do both. And I was like, can't do both. You can't live in Memphis and run a basketball team and run a college in Dallas. I was like, aren't you a member of the faith? Like, you got to tell the truth, right? Like, what are you doing? So, he says, think about it. So I go home and I know I'm in trouble, right? Because the thing you have to understand about me is that, I believe fundamentally at my core that sometimes the little guy should win, right? That sometimes you are given gifts in life to help, to serve, to leave places better than you found them. And anyone can show up and do the easy job. But you are blessed with your gifts to do things that really make a difference in the lives of people. So I called him back and I said, look, we've just submitted our bid for the NBA, and I'll give you 90 days. 90 days, and then you've got to find another president. That was 7 years ago. Okay? And during the course of that, we've been through lots of things. But the third failure, the third reason I'm in front of you is because I thought it'd be easy to get a set of restaurants and a grocery store in a community where there was nothing. Right? I mean, I studied business. I'm a reasonably bright guy. If you don't have anything and you bring it, you have a monopoly. So you should be able to make plenty of money in that area, right? Makes sense? No? Am I wrong? Makes sense. Thank you. Okay, I have like one person I like in this whole room, right? So, I thought that would be pretty simple. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't. I spent 2 years with people giving me every reason known to mankind why they wouldn't help bring a grocery store to a food desert. And I mean, I heard every excuse you can imagine. Finally, in fact, to show you how bad it was, we have 146 acres of land on our campus, and I offered to give free land to any grocer that would build a grocery store and just give jobs to people in the community. You know how many people took us up on that offer? None. We had no calls. It was like being the ugly guy at the dance, right? No one will dance with you, okay? It was horrible. Well, I'm sorry if I struck a little close to home for a couple of you with that last comment. What I can tell you is keep trying, all right? Keep trying. But the point is that these folks kept turning us down. And finally, one person said to me, he said, listen, I talked to my client, and they won't come because they said the people in that neighborhood don't look like their customers. So here's what you need to know about that neighborhood. 98% minority. Median household income is around $24,000 a year. So you have poor minority people. But they eat, right? There's a need. So how can people not help? So now I'm mad, right? Now I'm really angry. And I said, you know what? First thing I did when I became a college president, I cut the football team, right? Which, by the way, you can never do in Michigan, but I think you know that, all right? We cut the football team, and because we couldn't afford it, and we were terrible, we lost every game, but, why harbor on failures? So we turned the football field into an organic farm. 2 acres. We've grown over 20,000 pounds of food in the last 4 years. And let me be clear, we didn't know what we were doing, right? We didn't have an agricultural program. When the person I put in charge of the farm, when I called her and said, come to the meeting with the people from Pepsi, I asked her, I said, hey, didn't you major in economics in college? And she said, yeah. I said, great, you're going to run the farm. And she said, what? And I said, look, just Google it. We'll figure it out, all right? And that's a true story. Like, I literally told her that. And by the way, that is the most ridiculous thing ever, right? You cannot Google how to be a farmer and expect it to work, okay? Sometimes our stupidity saves us from ourselves. So, but we did it. We did it because there was a need, and at some point in your life, you're going to be faced with an opportunity where every possible odd is against you. There is no way it will ever work. And you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to decide whether in your gut you believe, whether you believe that you can bend circumstances to your will because you feel that strongly in what you're doing. There will be days where it makes no sense, where you won't understand how tomorrow can even come. But you will keep going, and you will believe when no one else does. That is how history gets made. That's how change happens. Do we really think anyone thought that the students that sat at bus counters in Greensboro or in Nashville, or protesters in Birmingham or Mobile, Alabama, could start the civil rights movement and prevail? Did we really think that when Steve Jobs was sitting there talking about computers and the experience and creating a market that did not exist, that he'd be successful? The reality of it is this: history is written by the bold. It's written by the daring. Fortunes are made by people who looked and saw a possibility where others looked and saw nothing but fear. So we jumped. We jumped, and funny things happened along the way. America fell in love with our story. The New York Times has written about us. The Wall Street Journal has written about us. We have been on news stations. Yahoo Sports, we were the cover story in Yahoo Sports. How about that for not having a football team? All right? The point is, some point in your life, you're going to find something that you believe in, and you're going to chase it. And you're going to chase it with everything you have. And I don't know how many of you have ever read The Alchemist, but there's a line in The Alchemist which goes something to this effect, that sometimes life will, well, now I'm about to screw it up. Effectively what it says is that in life, when you want something and you chase it with everything that you have, the universe will conspire to help you achieve it. Right? In other words, sometimes you get lucky and the Lord smiles on you. We are in the process of trying to bring a grocery store to our campus to solve the food desert issue. The 20,000 pounds of food that we've grown thus far, we gave away 10% of everything that we've grown in our program called Tithing to the Community. Our largest client is the Dallas Cowboys. Right? How's that for irony? Okay, so we've sent more food to the NFL than we ever sent players, okay? But the point of this whole story, and the point of sharing with you my failures, is sometimes you fail and fall forward. Learn how to fail and fall forward, because that way you are still moving. And as long as you are moving forward, you have a chance to succeed. And the lesson you've learned from those experiences create a much bigger universe than anything you could possibly imagine. We have turned our college into something called the New Urban College Model, which focuses on entrepreneurship and addressing the issues that the community surrounding our school needs. And our students are learning to create businesses in doing those things. That's because we kept failing and moving forward. So I was only supposed to take 15 minutes. I hope I achieved that. And then we're going to sit, and Dave and I are going to visit, and I can answer any questions you guys have. And I will tell you this, I will answer any question you ask, but do not ask a question where you don't want an honest answer. All right? I'm not one of those guys that's going to tell you something to make you feel better. I'm going to tell you the truth. Fair enough? Okay, 5 people are okay with that. The rest of you are like, lie to me, okay? All right. Well, how about this? When you stand up, tell me whether you want the truth or the lie, and I'll try and accommodate you, all right? Thank you very much.
Nice. Chair feels kind of small, huh?
Yeah, I mean, can we at least get the chair for me and not my son? Like what?
Michael, it's great to have you.
No, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for spending time with us. I think what you've done with Paul Quinn College is remarkable.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
And there's some fights in there, right?
Absolutely.
So what's interesting to me is that the press picks up the exciting stories, but there's some real difficult times. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of those fights and some of the strategies that you put in place to set in the course a positive trajectory for Paul Quinn?
Absolutely. So one of the things that happens when you take the road less traveled is no one believes you, right? I mean, people don't have a tendency to believe the things that they haven't seen before. So I was a first-time college president. In full disclosure, I never took any education classes at all, right? My sister's a 20-year teacher in Chicago, and, sibling rivalry. She's like, you don't know what you're doing. I was like, yeah, but you're still a grammar school teacher. And I'm a college president, right? And there's nothing wrong with being a grammar school teacher, because I don't want to get YouTubed on this, okay?
It's too late for that.
It's too late. Right? But we took a very common sense approach. But there were lots of days where people laughed at me, they made fun of me. I'd go to conferences and people would whisper and say some of the most hurtful things imaginable. The beauty of blogs and Twitter and Facebook now is people can say whatever they want to say and hide behind anonymity. People read those things. Like, you say that about people, and it's not as if they don't have families or they don't have pride or anything like that, but you have to be committed to your path. And I never play the game for 15 minutes from now, right? Like, I think in 5, 10, and 15-year tranches. And we knew that the plan we had was a good plan. We knew it was unconventional. One of the things about higher education tends to just move people around, right? So if you aren't good at something, like, listen, by the way, if you want job security, higher education, right? Because what happens is they give you a chance in multiple places.
Right.
And I don't subscribe to that, right? So sometimes you have to make changes. But you make changes and it upsets people, it angers people, but you just have to believe in what you're doing. But it doesn't mean that there aren't dark days. We have had days, when we had the accreditation issue, and you have to stand in front of people and they're depending on you to save their livelihoods, and the school's 138 years old at the time or whatever, and you're looking at the prospect of being the last picture on the wall, and that history will remember you as the guy that screwed it up. The school could survive Reconstruction, segregation, Jim Crow, but they couldn't survive you, right? I mean, so those are scary moments. And sometimes all you can do is just get out of bed and start swinging, and swing until you can't swing anymore, get up the next day and keep swinging.
And as part of that process, you identified entrepreneurship as an important ingredient to the long-term success.
Yes.
How's that manifesting itself at Paul Quinn, and why was that important?
Sure. So my father was an entrepreneur, and my dad grew up in New Orleans, single-parent household, never went to college, and built a restaurant business that afforded us a radically different life, right? I mean, we grew up upper middle class and went to the best schools and all those things. So I saw the transformative powers of entrepreneurship in my home. So everything that I have or I was afforded was because of the power of entrepreneurship. So when I looked at my students and I looked at the community of interest that we served, those kids were my dad when he was their age. And if it worked for my dad and it worked for my family, why wouldn't it work for someone else? The key then is figuring out what's the vehicle to deliver the entrepreneurship message. And for us, we decided that we were going to turn the entire curriculum and the entire college into an economic development incubator. And we're going to challenge our students to solve the problems of the communities where they come from. The reality of it is this: someone's going to get rich solving those problems. Why shouldn't it be our students?
Right. So what are some of the practical ways that's manifesting itself?
Sure. So one of the things that we've done is we've implemented a requirement where to graduate starting next fall, to graduate from Paul Quinn with that class coming in, you're going to need to create a business plan. All right? So you have your regular major and all those other things, but also you're going to have to deliver a business proposal, defend that proposal, so that way you're graduating with a job or you're creating jobs. Right? So we think that makes an enormous difference. Our core curriculum requires you to take a course in social entrepreneurship. So everyone at our college takes that course as just a rite of passage. The farm, while it was absolutely about addressing the urban food desert issue, it was also about, that's ground zero for entrepreneurship for us, right? Because that's a business. So it's changing a culture by teaching people to look at things and instead of complaining about them, identifying the business opportunity and addressing it.
So you've been at Paul Quinn now for 7 years?
Yeah, I had hair when I got there. No, I lost that battle a long time ago.
That was a fight that you did not win.
That was a fight. You know, Rogaine doesn't work for everyone, okay? Let me just tell you.
That's bad news for me. So at any rate, you know, you're sitting there 7 years ago and you have some students that are seniors, but also some that are freshmen. So you've got to see some students move through the full cycle of Paul Quinn, graduate, move on. Where are they going?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Anytime you come in and you espouse a change, lots of people fight you. And they fight you because of fear. They also fight you because maybe you don't deliver the message as well as you should. I'm not saying I delivered the message as well as I should have. We were in a crisis, and I did not have time to be as glib or as sensitive as perhaps I would have been if I'd had more leeway. But what's interesting is the students who had bought into what we're doing, we just produced our first Teach for America Corps member, right? And that's huge for us. I mean, I know lots of schools, like I know there are lots of students from Michigan that have done the program, but we never had anyone in our 142 years even apply.
Right.
So we're thrilled about that. 2 years ago, our valedictorian had one of the top LSAT scores in the country. So he is in the process of applying to law school. We've got this year's valedictorian will go work at GE. So we're excited about that, incredibly excited about that. So our students are starting to run the gambit. Some of them have decided they want to go to graduate school. We have one young man who I think if all goes well, he'll make his decision between maybe Teach for America and going off and getting his graduate degree at one of the Ivy League education schools. So it's starting to work. And it's working in a way that, quite frankly, you know, in a place like Michigan, you probably take for granted. Right. But if you have to start from ground zero, you celebrate those victories every step of the way.
So you're not only thinking about integrating entrepreneurship into the curriculum and the way students interact with their college education, but you're thinking about creating a sea change within university education generally, the new urban college model.
That's exactly right.
Why and what is that? I mean, how does that happen?
Sure. So the why is because it's needed. All right. There are approximately 1.7 million students every year that go to college and need remedial education. And what studies show us is that the majority of students who need remedial education never progress past that point. They become lost in those classes, they become discouraged, and they just sort of drop out of the system. That's a huge waste of talent, okay? Maybe the problem is the way in which we're teaching them. Now, lots of people learn the old-fashioned way, right? You could sit, you could lecture, they could extrapolate the information, think about it critically, produce an answer. But if you didn't come from that environment, maybe you need a different way of learning. Maybe it's experiential learning. Maybe you learn from doing. It doesn't mean that you aren't bright. It doesn't mean that you're gifted. It just means there's a different trigger point for your infatuation with knowledge. So what if you construct an education model where you are reinforcing the lessons of the classroom through action? And so case in point, in the class that I teach called Introduction to Quinnite Servant Leadership, my students have to do an annual project. And this is really what started to form the basis. Like I started to implement and beta test all these ideas in my class first. So one year, the city of Dallas was going to enlarge a garbage dump not far from our campus. It was going to become one of the largest garbage dumps in the Southwest.
Right.
So my students became engaged in this issue and were upset about it. So we turned that issue into the class project. And the class project was affect change. Right? I mean, that was the assignment, affect change. They researched it. They created a town hall meeting. It was the largest town hall meeting ever in that part of the city, where the city staff came out and had to answer questions about this garbage dump. Then, when the students felt like they had been disrespected or weren't listened to, they organized a protest. And the protest was called We Are Not Trash, which, you know, if you know your history, you know in Memphis, the I am a man, so it had a symmetry with that. So they go down, and at first people didn't understand because they're like, oh wait, you're going to protest and the city council's not in business that day. Exactly. So now they're their only story in town, right? They became the news story. And it was picked up. They went back the next week during the council hearing. It went from being a vote that was going to be something like 13-2 to I think it was 8-7. So they still lost, but in doing so, they placed an inordinate amount of attention on this issue, which inspired the waste haulers to sue the city because they felt the actions they took were illegal. Turns out, federal court ruled in favor of the waste haulers, so the students won, right?
So your students made sure there was no garbage dump in that part of the town.
They made sure that the garbage dump that was already there wasn't expanded, right? So we taught public policy, we taught politics, we taught business, we taught environmental issues and justice. Now, from that came a partnership that we're doing with Duke University, and next fall, 8 Duke students and 8 Paul Quinn students are going to go to school together. Right. They're going to live at Paul Quinn for 2 or 3 weeks. They'll live at Duke together for 2 or 3 weeks. After that, they'll be in therapy for a year. But you know, it's the price of success. Okay.
The Paul Quinn students will be. Yeah.
All of them will be, right? Everybody involved. And the professors, it'll be 3 Duke professors, a couple of Paul Quinn professors, and the subject matter is sustainable economic development of under-resourced communities.
Right.
So this is what the new urban college model says. It says, let's take the issues of the communities that we serve, let's use them as the academic backdrop and the subject matter for our institution. So for us, it's access to food, access to capital, access to quality education. We're building businesses and turning students into business people on those 3 access points.
This is excellent stuff, and I could ask 1,000 more questions. I want to open it up quickly to students so that we can get some of your questions as well. Let's turn on the lights and have the mics ready.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Dauber, and I'm visiting here from Naperville, Illinois. I'm a prospective student here at Michigan, and I have 2 possibly related questions. My first one is, what are the pink and purple things you're wearing on your wrist? And my second question is, on the days when everything seems to be falling apart and no one believes in you, how do you remind yourself to keep going and stay strong?
Those are great questions. I'm from Chicago, so it's always good to see someone from the Chicago area. So these things around my wrist, they're 2 separate things. One is the purple wristband. It says Paul Quinn College, and what we did when I came in, so when you are at a school that you've got to build, you look for opportunities to talk about your message. So we had these created, and we wear them on our right wrist. So when we shake hands, people do exactly what you just did. You ask us about them, and then we can tell you about our college, right? The second one was made for me by one of my freshmen. She knitted it over the Christmas holidays, and it's got our slogan, is #NationBuilding, right? So we are in a nation building campaign. And it is, you know, and let me say, we're a small school, so it's a little bit gutsy to talk about we're a nation, right? But you speak it into existence. And I am an unapologetic cheerleader for my students. And when they do things that are cool, or even some that maybe aren't so cool, but they need some support, I embrace it wholeheartedly. She made this, put it on Facebook to show me, and I'm Facebook friends with lots of my students, and Twitter, and, you know, Instagram. I'm a little out of control, right? But she gave it to me, and I just thought it was cool, and I will support her and her efforts, and it also serves to remind me that we're nation building. Now, the second question you asked, what do I do on my darkest days? I do 3 things, right? The first is I have an incredibly beautiful wife and a 3-year-old son that I adore, and I come home every night and I look at them and I hug them and I kiss them, and I am just thankful that I have the opportunity to do things to make them proud of me. So that helps me keep perspective. I pray a lot, right? And then the last one is I'm just thankful, right? I'm thankful that I have a chance to do something that matters and that matters to me. And I just try and keep that perspective.
Thank you.
What's something that might not be on the agenda or radar of the new Michigan president that you wish were, and maybe some advice for the incoming president?
YouTube. This is on YouTube.
Right. So the first thing that I would say is welcome, right? Welcome to the fraternity, right? I mean, it's a fraternity. Now we don't have Animal House or anything like that, right? But it's a fraternity. But so there are 2 things that I would tell them. One is we are entering a time in the history of higher education where we will be judged as much by the actions we didn't take as by those that we did. All right? This is not a time for the weak. It's not a time to lay it up and play it safe. We don't have that luxury anymore. All right? You are president of one of the signature institutions in America. By virtue of that fact, you are a leader. So lead. All right? That would be my advice to them. In terms of issues, I don't think that there are any issues that he is probably not painfully aware of, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, you've got a lawsuit. That's pretty important, okay? You know, that's going to shape not only what happens at Michigan, but what happens at state universities across this country for a long time coming. You've got an issue with your minority student population. That's an issue all over the country. Right? The cost of education is out of control. Okay, so you're going to have to, anyone who didn't nod their head before, I see you all nodding your heads now, right? Okay, that is critically important. Look, at our school, we don't charge as much as Michigan charges, right? But it's still too much for our students, so we're going to have to address that issue. All right, so I just can't imagine that he isn't very much aware of the issues on the table. What I would tell him is don't be afraid to use a non-higher education approach to solving it.
One last question. Do you have any questions here?
All right.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for speaking. I think you're a really inspiring speaker. Glad I heard you today.
Oh, thank you.
So my question has to do with the fact that it's an increasing problem at this university that the African American community is underrepresented. And especially with the fact that we have such a strong community, black community in Southeast Michigan, there's clearly a connection, a problem with a connection between this university and the surrounding communities. It's also a problem that we can't really use affirmative action to solve this problem. So with your knowledge about social entrepreneurship and change in communities nearby universities, what do you think are some good strategies for solving this problem using entrepreneurship or other community strategies besides affirmative action?
That is a fantastic question. He deserves an applause for that question, right? So I would tell you a couple things. This issue with black students in Michigan is not new, all right? It was here when I went to college. I suspect that it was there even before then. So it indicates that there's an institutional issue there, all right? Michigan's not alone in that problem. So you've got some competing forces. There is a finite amount of students who can attend the University of Michigan, all right? Just qualifications, everything considered, the ability to pay, you know, academic ability, inclination, all of that, all right? So think about the schools that everyone applied to. When you start talking about minority students, that pool, or black students especially, right? That pool is sharply decreased. That means that recruiting has to look so much different than it's ever looked before. The easy way of addressing that was affirmative action, right? So everybody said, well, you know, we can set up this number and we can give this special consideration, and that'll do it. Now you have to be more aggressive and more creative. It can absolutely be done, all right? But it's more labor intensive. And let's just call it what it is. Nobody wants to work that hard, all right? I mean, look, we go through people in our recruiting office like you go through sticks of gum, all right? Because you have to work. You've got to get up early. You've got to call people. The model for how you solve that problem isn't in your undergraduate admissions office. It's in your football recruiting office, all right? You want to figure out how you get students? Implement the football model. That's what we did, right? But that is labor intensive because apparently typical recruiters don't want to spend the night in the office like football coaches do, right? And I'm not judging them, right? But it's a different level of effort. So the first thing I would tell you is they need to incorporate some different voices in that equation. It can be done, but you're going to have to look in places you haven't looked before, and then you're going to have to do a better job of supporting. All right? I mean, case in point, we had 23 new students from Chicago this year, and love them, but that was the largest single group of students in our freshman class. So that brought about a different set of issues. So we had to design different systems to support them. That's not business as usual. But it's also not about taking those students, separating them into special categories and saying, okay, here's all the program support we have for you over here, and only the black students go over here. Well, that doesn't make it better, right? So you have to figure out how you incorporate them. I have a competitive advantage in that at our school, we're trying to figure out how to make the white students more comfortable, right? Right? Which when you think about it, is kind of funny, okay? So if you want to see how we do that, I'm happy to have that conversation. There are probably some lessons to be learned there. But from an entrepreneurship standpoint, it sounds to me like there's a business opportunity in designing a business that identifies, cultivates, and then markets qualified minority students to elite institutions. All I would ask is if you do it, just cut me in. All right.
University of Michigan, I'm going to make a prediction. All of you in this room will hear the name President Michael Sorrell again. I'm pretty sure of that. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you, guys.